Hey, Paul, welcome back to the show. As a way of getting started, give us an update on yourself.
Hey Brian, happy Thanksgiving. Update's pretty good. I've spent the past year and change, not in an operational role for the first time in almost 35 years, doing some private equity work, and it gave me a little time to become an author. And so I've published my first book here called Selling the Cloud, and it's definitely made my mom very proud.
Yeah. What was the motivation behind writing the book?
If you do this operational activity for as long as I did, and I just felt this was a way of giving back to the whole ecosystem. So, I put together something that, really is a playbook specifically for enterprise sales and cloud-based selling, but I think it's applicable across all types of selling. I've gotten feedback from people well outside of our traditional industry, and the motivation was to, initially just provide kind of a playbook for whether you're, coming out of college and it's your first sales job, or you're a CRO of a public company, in technology that's really looking to find a way of getting your sales teams, into a different level of selling, their product or service. So that kind of was the inspiration. And then finally, after all these years, my co-author, Mark Petruzzi, kind of said, hey, this is about the time to do it. And, with all the things going on in the world, it was the stars aligned. And that was kind of the motivation, Brian.
And what was it like? Because I went through that process too, because, you know, great salespeople, some of it's kind of unconsciously competent, where you kind of like, what to do, but you really can't. Well, you probably were better at it because you had to tell reps.
Right. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. It's that I just never put it into the documentation. So over the
Yeah.
years, I had this notebook that, I kept, and I just would always write certain things in. And, the first time around, I thought I had all these experiences that probably are better for a Netflix miniseries,
Yeah.
the early Ariba days, the early SAP days. And I said, oh, that's probably not going to go over well in book fashion. So I'll save that for the mini series. And I said, but all these things that I've learned over the years in an unconsciously competent way, kind of tips and tricks from a perspective of what are the things that, the basic things you really need to know to be successful, in this profession. And it is a profession that needs to be worked at. And I tried to boil it down to 12 chapters, which was really the hard part, because there was, probably enough notes for 3 or 4 of these books. But knowing that our audience is sales folks, the attention span is definitely no more than 12 chapters.
And you kind of took a different approach. There was a little bit of crowdsourcing to it as well, wasn't there?
Yeah, I know so many folks, as you probably do, Brian, that are so successful in our business. And that was actually the hardest part of the book, is that I had all this notes and things from my 35 plus years. And I said, wouldn't it be cool if I went to, a dozen other people like myself and got that feedback and input that their experiences. So now you have, 12 times the experiences that I have with people like Jim Steele and Joe Fuca and Maria Martinez and Eileen and Klaus and all these people who are, we call them titans of the industry. But it was a crowdsource event. And I could tell you, administratively, getting them, coordinated to get their input and feedback, it was a lot harder than, getting me to do it. So just imagine that times 12. So it was a really challenging experience. But I think if you look at the views of these titans and the experiences that they brought to the book, it really was, in my opinion, an invaluable crowdsourced experience, as you say.
That was the hardest part, wasn't it? Because
It really
anytime you get
was.
reps together, no, this is more
Uh,
important. No, this is more
yeah,
important. And
exactly.
it's
Yeah,
like,
just
oh, they're all
it,
important. And it's like, ah.
everything's important. Yeah, prioritization has never been one of our skills.
But I like the approach that you took because it wasn't so much tips and tricks, but more of a framework.
Yeah, and I think what we wanted to do is I always thought when I, do a lot of work with colleges, universities, and I'm on a couple of the boards of my alma maters, and I just look at the curriculum, and I think you see this too. There's a few colleges that have a curriculum around selling, but very, very few. I mean, there's all marketing and business administration and all these other things. So when you get done college, the biggest opportunities are to go get sales jobs. And there's no real training, right? I mean, there is, but there isn't. And I wanted to be able to provide a framework and a kind of guideline as to how to really be a strong sales rep, how to hire, strong salespeople. What are the kind of soft skills that are required that we have found over the 30 plus years that we've all agreed on that really truly make, say, trust-based selling advisors as opposed to commodity salespeople. It's a big difference. And so I think we tried to take that approach and in exposing it to some of the, kind of curriculum directors or provosts at some of these universities. They're like, wow, this is a class. Like you could come in and teach a whole semester on each one of these chapters. And we didn't realize that going in, but I think that's what we're seeing now, and so it wasn't a tips and tricks book. There's a lot of those out there, I can assure you. And
375 closes.
Yeah. And I laugh at a lot of the stuff that you do is so entertaining, and it's so relevant. And I just scratch my head and say, oh my gosh, and I know I've learned that or talked about that and said that so many times over the past number of years. And I think you're right. There are a lot of those kinds of tips and tricks. And our profession isn't about accumulating a bunch of tips and tricks. It's about building a framework of how to be a professional sales executive and understanding those things and working on those. And if you look at each one of these chapters, I kind of feel that if I had to boil it down to, a couple 100-page book with larger font for sales reps, I wanted to make it as broad as possible, but as complete in that thinking. And I think that's what we really were able to accomplish with this. And so, like I said, there's a lot of tips and trick books out there. I'm not going to recommend any, but there's a lot of those out there. This is not one of them, but I really think this could be one of these Bibles, if you will, that 10 years from now, someone could pick up and it could still be relevant.
And that's what I liked about it, because most sales books, they kind of diminish the previous generation of doing things. And, oh, no, the best do it this way. And then they outline one unique little skill that might get interest or someone's attention, but it doesn't close a deal. The deals that you've worked on, that I've worked on, it's a long process.
Yeah, it's a journey, right? I mean, and the selling is a journey. And I've always, for the most part, my entire career sold larger transactions, which, nothing against, kind of a transactional based selling or smaller, ACV deals or, smaller type, less complex selling is still hard work. But I think when you get into the enterprise, you get into large companies, you get into complexities of what you're selling, the abstract of technology or software, it's just different. And I think, a lot of people try to take shortcuts. They try to get the tips and tricks. And, fundamentally, it comes down to a certain number of activities that you need to perform, and you need to perform them very consistently well over that cycle, because, you make one mistake. It's not like baseball where you get 3 strikes, right? You make one mistake in an enterprise deal, you're out, right? I mean, it's over, right? Because there are alternatives. And, I think, I always said to my sales teams, and when I would do my kickoffs, especially with global organizations, I used to equate everything to, hey, we're in the Champions League, right? So in football or soccer, as they call it over the pond, the Champions League is where Ronaldo and all these great players play. And if you're now in that league where you're selling multi-million-dollar deals that take 6, 9, 12 months to sell, the margin for error is very, very slim. The competition is incredibly strong. And if you don't do everything right, your chances are pretty much zero of winning a big deal. So I think, going back to these basics in this playbook, if you will, doing all those things properly, it just increases your odds of getting the business, especially in the Champions League.
And what were some of the key distinctions? Because you worked at like the big enterprise companies, and some were completely new technologies. Other were like the next generation of an existing technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very interesting based upon where you are in that cycle right now. unfortunately, being as old as I am, I've seen all the cycles, right? You go from, mainframe to
Electricity.
client server to the internet, to the cloud. And, I guess whatever's next, I probably won't be around for that one, but it changes so quick. And if you're selling something new that is old, so for example, when Salesforce came in and replaced Siebel, right? It's pretty, I don't want to say easy, but it's easier for people to understand, hey, I've bought this before.
Right.
It was expensive. It took forever to install. It was hard to use. And now you've got something that's better, faster, cheaper. Obviously, in that situation, it's not easier, but it is easier, right? Because people have budget for this. It's a replacement sale. If you're doing a disruptive technology, which I've been involved in, and it's really not the same way of doing it as you did it before. And there's change management involved. There's a whole infrastructure change. There's probably McKinsey, Bain, BCG, the strategic consultancies that are in at the C level talking about a finance transformation, a digital transformation. Those are very different types of selling motions, if you will, but it still comes back to the fundamental things you need to do to win those larger transactions. It's just that your path is going to be very different if you're trying to get budget that is not existing versus trying to win the budget from someone else because it's already set up. So both not easy, but one much different than the other.
And what were some of those key distinctions between the B players, the kind of 80 to 100% at quota, and the A players, the 150, the 200, the ones that you just could not let go?
Yeah, I'll tell you, and I put a whole section in here on hiring, right? Because over the years of my experience, the profile of reps that are that 100 plus 150 versus I'll call them the B or C players in selling. And look, if you have an organization of 500 sales reps, there's no way you're going to get all A's because there's just not enough of them. The numbers don't work, right? The math doesn't work, but you can get a strong base of A players in your organization early stages that really help the B's become B pluses or become A's eventually. And, through enablement and things like that, they can get better. But I think I look at, I always used to hire, A students from B schools. And what I mean by that is not somebody who's grown up with the silver spoon. They were street fighters. They had to work hard. Maybe they were the first people in their family tree to go to college. They couldn't get into Yale or Harvard or Penn or Stanford, but they got into somewhere else and made the best of it. Those are the people I like to have, on the team. They have grit. There's a whole section on here in grit and a definition of that. And I called it street fighter because I grew up in South Philly, so I understood what it took. And then those were very applicable skills growing up in a challenging neighborhood as a kid to apply to a selling environment. Because let's face it, sales is war. And what I found recently too, especially in cloud software, especially in SaaS software and in large enterprises, the number of females that are just so good at selling in today's environment. And, growing up, we had very few female sales reps. I mean, especially early SAP days, there just was a very, very small number. And I think today, if you look broadly, in enterprise sales, it's probably close to 40 to 50% now are females. And why are they better in general? I think their profile fits very well. They're empathetic. They have authenticity, all the things that we look at as key criteria. And let me tell you, they can multitask and manage complex environments. They do it at home, right? Yeah. So they're just better at it, I think, than we are in some cases. And I'm shocked that we as CROs or presidents and heads of sales aren't looking to bring more of that, into the organization. And it has nothing to do with diversity quotas or anything like that. Because at the end of the day, you have a spreadsheet, you have a quota. They don't care if you didn't make 100% what your composition of the sales force is. At the end of the day, you got to hit your numbers. And if you hit your numbers and you can hit your numbers better with reps that have empathy, that have authenticity, that have high EQ, which is another thing I found in that profile. We had a great experience at Anaplan where we just had a lot of successful reps that were female. And just, I didn't have a method to the madness. It's just they were better. So I don't know if that's a trend, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Well, I mean, if you look at teenage and college years, who are more social, men or women?
Well, I got two young daughters. I got three altogether, but and one boy, and it's just the poor boy is just not even in the same ballpark as
He's
as
playing
his three
video
sisters.
games,
Yeah.
or he's throwing the ball and wrestling with guys and
Uh,
getting in fights.
I always thought, and this is probably unrelated to anything we're going to talk about, but when I grew up, the boys and girls were pretty similar, maybe in
Right.
maturity. They were much more mature, but not that much. Now, it's not even close. I mean, if you look at a 14 or 16-year-old boy versus the comparable female equivalent, forget about it. We got no
Right.
shot, Brian.
Yeah. I mean, who's active on social media? Do you know a teenage girl who isn't?
Well, I think they're all active now, and it's a big change now. And I always try to say in selling, social media is such an important part of the selling process in a lot of ways. One, it's a way for you to identify the people in that target organization you're trying to sell. You can learn so much about people on social. And then I also tell my 29-year-old daughter that, look, you got to be very careful on what you post if you're in sales, right? Because I always go back to like Michael Jordan. And if you watch that special, he's like, yeah, everybody buys sneakers. So you just got to be nice to everybody and make sure that you understand your customer and realize that in today's world, the transparency with LinkedIn and with social media and other platforms, it's just so critical that you're making sure you're doing the right things because, and doing the right homework too. You can find out amazing things about people that you probably aren't going to find that without that. So if you can find out about people that you're about to go sell to through, Facebook or TikTok or whatever is the new greatest thing, Snapchat, do whatever you can to learn that because you get insights into that personality and that'll help you be more effective when you're communicating with the prospect for sure.
And I like that A student at a B school, because it also applies for hiring reps from other companies.
Yeah, it's a great one because you think you got this great company that's cranking out all these terrific salespeople, but the reality is the turnover in our business is incredibly high, as you know, Brian, 20 to 25% attrition. So the problem with that is you might have a great resume that says you've been at all these great companies, but now you can't ask for their W-2 because it's against the law. That used to be an easy way to hire, to know whether or not they really were delivering. And it's harder now because everybody's resume looks good, but you really have to determine who are those, A students, if you will, that, regardless of the companies they come from. But there are certain companies that do train and do well in preparing reps or pre-sales people. And I think that's important when you're going to recruit. We always targeted companies that we had a lot of respect for, whether we competed with them or not. And I always felt until I got the letter from their attorney, for poaching, that we weren't doing a good enough job going after them. So predatory hiring is it's almost critical part of your recruiting process today, because if you're not going after the best people, someone else is. And you need to be proactive in doing that.
Right. Because if they're crushing it at a C company, they've got to be good. Crushing it
There's
at
no,
an A company is not that
you
hard.
don't know. They might have just gotten lucky. They might have.
Yeah.
You're exactly right. So I think that model, about the students in school, it's the same with the companies. And I've always looked at companies that, it's an okay. How do they? Could you imagine if they were selling at our company in a good territory? They'd be making 5 times as much money. And so finding those needles in the haystack, if you will, and I can guarantee you, they are not the reps that have their resume on LinkedIn. They're not looking for a job. You have to have a very good proactive recruiting team. It's probably one of the most important things when you're talking about hiring, up a sales team. You better get a good recruiting engine, internal or external, to help you and educate that recruiter on the target profile, the target companies, and then let them go after and find out who they can pull out, because the people that you want are obviously not, on the market. You got to
Yeah.
convince them to come to your company. And that's the hard part.
And like when you were a leader, how could you tell when it was the rep versus the territory or the manager or the timing?
Yeah, that's an important thing. I think a lot of companies, Brian, make mistakes there. And my experience at Anaplan was great because we actually had tools that helped us in this area where we could identify and score customers and score territories and not
Yeah,
just say everybody gets the same quota. And there was a hot territory which would require higher quota than a warm or cold territory that you knew you were putting somebody into. And so the ramp in months might be 6 or 9 months. And so there is a lot of analytics that go into that because you're right. Someone could come into an environment where they're in a great territory and all they got to do is show up and make sure the DocuSign has enough envelopes ready for the orders that come in. Doesn't mean they're a good rep or that they're going to be successful long term in a different territory. But if you've got the territories as balanced as you can, and that doesn't mean peanut butter spreading them, you got the quota set properly, you got the accounts scored properly, it really does allow you to take a data driven approach to analyzing and scoring your reps. Because I've always said if a rep is maybe not 100% a quota, are they a bad rep? Well, not necessarily. And even vice versa, if you get somebody who has a bluebird, they think they're the best rep in the world and they just happen to be in the right place at the right time. So I would always say to people, use the data, whether it's on spreadsheets, a sophisticated platform like Anaplan, the back of an envelope, but use a data-driven approach to really analyze your territories, your quotas, your customers and prospects as far as scoring them and scoring that opportunity. And then it makes it a lot easier to really judge reps, not just on a spreadsheet where they are based on quota. Very important to do that. Most companies, believe it or not, they don't.
they don't. It's based off of, folklore, flipping a
Yeah,
coin,
yeah. Dartboard.
counting number of people. I remember a manager going, well, Los Angeles is the second largest city in the country. And it's like, well, it's a kind of a different city than
Yeah.
Manhattan.
And we're not, yeah. In fact, if you mentioned LA is really a mid-market territory when you
Yeah.
compare it to like a New York or Chicago or even Atlanta. And if you don't have those statistics and numbers and build it, the way I just had mentioned, you might have a big disparity. And of course, the worst thing that happens, you have a small number of people, generating all the revenue, and then a larger group of people that are under 50% of quota. That's not a good, sustainable, pipeline of reps to build a company for sure.
Now, what did you have any epiphanies when you were writing the book? Anything like, well, I didn't think that was that important, but now I do, or
Yeah, I did, and I think I actually saw you in one of your, walks around your neighborhood, I guess, talk about trust. And I always kind of knew that people bought from people, right? And in the past, you were able to build these trusted relationships over a much longer time period, right? I mean, I wrote in the book that I would sell to the same person 4 or 5 times through either 3 or 4 companies that I worked for and or 3 or 4 companies that they work for, right? And the way you were able to do that, obviously, is you built a trusted relationship over a long time period, and then you come back to them and say, hey, I'm working now at this new company and it's a great product. I want to show it to you, and they're going to be receptive because you've built that trusted relationship. And now, if you think about the world we live in, especially this crazy world that we're living in now, and I don't think it's going to change that dramatically, going forward, because the world is now accustomed to a much different level of interaction, right? I see it with the kids. They're on social media. They don't ever use the actual components of a cell phone to call anybody, right? God forbid,
why would you do that?
But if there's all these other ways, and so I think you have to figure out, how do you build a trusted relationship, and how do you do it where you might not ever meet somebody face to face? I mean, for old guys like us, it's almost impossible to think like that. But you just have to, adjust the way you think. And recently at Stripes, we did 2 deals where we never met the people face to face. I mean, and you're talking about lending somebody or investing $100 million in a company. It's a pretty big deal for both sides, right? The entrepreneur we're giving money to and picking us versus somebody else that can give them money, and never meeting some of these folks face to face. It's just a new way I think we're going to have to deal with. But there was a trust that was built up during that process And I still firmly believe with all the tips and tricks that are out there and all the books that have been sold, people still buy from people, especially in a complex environment. And they have to feel some level of trust to buy from you. It's because your products may be better, but probably not much better than the other product. So it really is the people and the trust that's built through that sales process, which has dramatically changed.
Right. Because when you were looking at their financials, you had to believe them. And
Right.
that was based off of some intrinsic sense of, is the person telling me the truth? Right? Do they do what they say?
Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, our industry and our profession is not really one that establishes the trust immediately, nor do we have the trust going in, right? I mean,
Have
people
the
are
opposite.
skeptical. Yeah, it's like we're all used car sales guys, right? Coming in, so we start out at a very low level of trust, and we have to build it up over the cycle. So you're right, people are traditionally distrustful of sales folks, and in some reasons it does warrant, but for the most part, I think a majority of the professional sellers are trustworthy. They do care about the customer, they do have empathy, they are authentic, all the things we talk about that build that trust. But you only need one or two bad ones for someone to experience, for them to have that skepticism going into the cycle. So yeah, it is very important to do that. And if you don't, it's even more important today. You're not going to get the business.
And was there something that you had to convince your co-author about that you
You
felt
know,
really?
the good news about Mark and I, so I knew Mark from back in the early SAP days. He was the consultant and I was the product sales guy at SAP. So I think he worked for Deloitte or whatever. And then we kind of got reconnected a couple years ago. And so we really had an interesting view of the selling process. Me coming from the product side with, Anaplan and Pipeline and SAP and Ariba, and him coming from the consulting side, right? Because today it's even more important that you have a collaborative selling environment. I mean, you look at the Salesforce ecosystem of thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of companies, that are combined in that kind of an ecosystem, and SAP and Oracle have a similar kind of environment. And then you look at all the GSIs and the strategic consultancies. There's so many folks involved in these large companies. You can't really do it on your own. You really need that collaboration with, specifically in enterprise sales, the delivery organization, the customer success groups, the consultancies. They're really so integral into delivering a total transformation or solution. And so I think from the very beginning, we both saw the importance of that collaborative selling environment. And I think that's where we kind of looked at this and said, how do we pull this all together in the book? And Klaus Bessier, who was the original CEO of SAP when we first came to the US in the late 80s. I mean, he built the ecosystem at SAP in 88, 89, 90. Now we just all take that ecosystem and partner ecosystem for granted. As a software company, you have to build it. But he was the first, person to ever think about why we would collaboratively sell together with these folks. And that was really the genesis of it. So we experienced that almost from the very beginning. So we were very much aligned, in that collaborative selling approach.
And what do you hope people get out of reading the book?
Brian, like I said, I think it has broad appeal for the sales rep that's not even a sales rep yet, coming out of college, to the CRO of a multi-billion-dollar company. And I think what it does is, for me, it brings you back to basics, right? It's a playbook, right, for the success. And so it's not the tips and tricks. It's not so if you read through these 12 chapters, you should really feel that every one of those chapters, as well as the titans that are giving that crowdsourced kind of input, if you're not learning something from every chapter, we've done a disservice to the reader. And I think there is something to learn. We talked about trust, at length. That's one of the chapters. We talked about hiring, that profile, that proper profile of a sales rep. So I think you should get 12 bits of information about each one of them. Mindset. There's a whole chapter on mindset. We can talk about that I think that's even more important today with the kind of stress and all the challenges, that we're facing in our everyday personal lives, right? If you don't have the right mindset, you're going to go out and talk to a customer. I guarantee you're going to piss them off, right? Or you're going to, go crazy. So all these things, if you look at each one of these, chapters, you should get something out of it, whether you're, like I said, first time to the profession or been doing it like me for 30 something years. And I think that's what I'm excited about with this, and that because it's such a broad capabilities of all these great people who've been doing this for so long into, a short, compact, 200 and something pages with big font, makes it easy reading. And I guarantee you, folks are going to learn from it. And we've got a lot of great feedback of people that are, in both of those sides of the spectrum, Brian, saying, wow, you know what? This really made sense. It really emphasized something that I didn't put enough emphasis on, or it was exactly what I was doing. I really feel confident that it's the right way to go. And so I really, encourage folks to take time to read through it, especially during these holiday seasons. And, I think they'll get something out of it, and they will enjoy it for sure. I mean, just the folks that are involved in this, the 12 Titans, if you will, the level of input they've had on our business over the past, couple of decades is phenomenal. And learning from them is invaluable, especially for like $13.99.
Yeah. And it was free on Kindle at first, that first
Yeah,
day.
yeah, you missed that window, right? I think you had to sign up for the unlimited Kindle and you got it free. And we will have the Audible book out in a few weeks, apparently, for us sales folks that are averse to the old school, paper. You can, put it onto your iPhone, or when you're driving around in the car, you listen to it.
Cool. And where can people go to connect with you?
Yeah, I'm at paul@stripes.co. So if any one of your listeners ever want to have a chat or connect up, paul@stripes.co, not com, co. That's my email directly. And, please feel free to go on Amazon and buy the book.